On this episode, two medical mysteries that defied the experts.
The doctor looked at me and said, if you don't do what we tell you to do, you're going to die a horrible death in 6 months.
This was going to be a battle.
When Liana Jones is blindsided by crippling sinus pains, her husband Tom embarks on a desperate mission to save his wife before it's too late.
I told the family, we'll do what we have to do to beat this. Well, I wasn't going to lose her. No way.
Then, when 28-year-old Robin Akbar develops intense asthma-like symptoms, she has no idea it will spiral into a battle to the last breath.
She was always coughing, always grabbing her chest and not being able to breathe.
I knew if I did not find what was going on with me, I was going to die.
In the spring of 1978, 23-year-old Liana Bowers was a single mother of 3 young children. She just started a job as a hospital receptionist when Tom Jones, a colleague, experienced what can only be described as love at first sight.
I was at the local hospital working as a laboratory technician. I will never forget seeing her walking down the hallway, this beautiful, long-legged blonde in her white hospital outfit, heading towards the locker to go home. I turned to my friend and I said, I could get into a lot of trouble with this young lady. She's a knockout.
We just started talking, and we just became very, very good friends.
And we got to know each other extremely well, and we just fell together.
Tom and I were married on September 24th, 1982. And we were very thankful to be married because we both had been divorced.
Liana and I had children by previous marriages.
The kids were happy. It was nice for them to be together as a family.
Liana is a bundle of energy, working full-time and running the household as well. But she and Tom have their hearts set on a dream, owning a horse farm.
We just decided one day that we would sell our house and buy a farm.
I was raised on a farm, and I just loved the atmosphere. I just loved the feeling of a farm. I really enjoyed working outside and working in the gardens, and I would go out and help him muck the stalls, groom the horses, give them a bath.
She would take care of just about everything. You know, I'd turn around and it was done.
By the summer of 2002, Liana decides to work part-time at a real estate firm so that she can devote more energy to their farm.
I started work at the company, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I felt really good.
Life couldn't be much better for Liana. But in July of that year, she's completely taken aback when her health takes a sudden turn for the worse.
I noticed my sinuses hurt. They ached, and I had to breathe out of my mouth if I wanted to get air into my lungs.
She's always had allergies. They would crop up in the middle of the summer, so I wasn't concerned, but at some point, Liana started having more problems than she used to.
The sinus pressure some days was so bad that my face ached across my nose, under my eyes, and to about my temples. I went to see my family doctor. The doctor did a very thorough exam and decided it was seasonal allergies. The doctor prescribed pills for me, and that helped a great deal.
However, the relief is short-lived, and as the weeks go by, Liana's excruciating sinus pain begins to wear her down.
We noticed that she was running out of energy a lot quicker than she used to. She'd have to come home and take a 2-hour nap before we even ate dinner. This was not Liana.
I did not understand why. I just thought, it's my age.
Liana struggles to get through the days as best she can. Then, one evening in September, she's suddenly grappling with an entirely new and horrifying problem.
I was in the office by myself, and my vision started getting blurry. And then all at once, I could not see out of my left eye at all. My left eye just went blank and dark. It was very scary.
And I get this phone call from Liana. Tom, I've got a problem. I've gone blind in my left eye. So I said, okay, let's call the doctor and get in there to see him as quickly as possible.
We went to the doctor's office. When the ophthalmologist examined my eye, he turned to me, he goes, I can only be the bearer of bad news. It looks like the optic nerve and vessel are both dying. I'm not sure if you will ever regain your sight back. I almost felt lost because I didn't know if it was going to happen in my right eye to where I couldn't see at all. It scared me so bad.
We were very concerned. But, my big thing is, why is it happening and how can we fix it? He checked her blood pressure, which was a little high.
He goes, you could have had a stroke in your eye.
When he said stroke, I said, okay. There wasn't any indication of that before. I was flabbergasted.
And I'm like, oh no. My grandmother had 2 strokes. My other grandmother, I believe, had a stroke. I mean, it runs in the family.
And he immediately said, well, let's get a cardiac workup.
Liana and Tom head straight to the hospital, where she undergoes a series of tests. But there's no sign of a circulatory problem.
I hadn't had a stroke. I didn't have any blocked arteries, and my heart seemed to be working fine.
I was really shocked at that point, because what would cause somebody to lose their eyesight? That doesn't make any sense.
Puzzled by Liana's sudden blindness, the doctors order a CT scan, and the Joneses head home.
That was very stressful because we had no idea what the outcome was going to be.
When all the results came back, our general practitioner called us up and said, we need to get you to an ENT specialist right away.
Tom was a nervous wreck, but I was fine. I was just like, okay, we're going to find out what this is.
We went in to see the ENT. He said, well, listen, I've got some bad news for you.
He said, we have found a mass in your sinus. And Tom looked at me, and I was probably white as a sheet.
He described the size of the mass as bigger than a golf ball, but smaller than a tennis ball. It encompassed 95% of her sphenoid sinus. It was scary. It was really scary.
I had no idea what to think. I had never faced anything like this before.
Initially, they didn't know what it was. The ENT surgeon flat out said, look, we need to go in and do a biopsy of this and figure out what's going on.
After undergoing a round of antibiotics to ward off any possible infections, Liana endures the biopsy. The next 3 days are almost unbearable as she and Tom wait for the findings to come in.
Our ENT doctor told us that it came back with the characteristics of a rare tumor.
He said, Liana, you have what is termed as an olfactory neuroblastoma.
An olfactory neuroblastoma is a malignant tumor located in the sinus cavity, directly under the brain.
I'm like, okay, so this means I have cancer. I just sat there and cried because my allergy problems were now diagnosed as cancer.
We went back down to see the oncologist. He said the prognosis is not very good, and we need to be very aggressive in the way we treat this.
And the doctor looked at me and said, we have to do brain surgery. I was a nervous wreck. And he slaps his hands together. He goes, if you don't do what we tell you to do, you're going to die a horrible death in 6 months. I mean, he was so mean when he said it. He was like towering over me, and I was scared into submission. I didn't know what else to do.
I wasn't real tickled with the way we were being treated. And I was quite concerned because the problem with the sphenoid sinus is that it's in a very dangerous area. So a slip of the knife, a miscalculation in that area could be fatal.
The risky surgery is scheduled for later in the week, and Liana goes home, where she tries to come to terms with what awaits her.
I thought, okay, God, you're going to have to tell me. Do I need to start writing letters to my children and my grandchildren to tell them goodbye?
How are we going to tell the kids this? You know, is this it? How much time do we have? I told the family, we'll do what we have to do to beat this. Well, I wasn't going to lose her. No way.
While they're determined to bravely face the uncertain future, nothing could have prepared Liana for the bizarre turn of events that transpires just 2 days later.
I woke up and I heard the cat meow.
And Liana grabs me and shakes me violently. She says, Tom, I can see the cat. What do you mean you can see the cat? It's 6 o'clock in the morning. Will you go back to bed? She says, Tom, I can see the cat with my left eye. And
We called the doctor's office. He goes, okay, that never happens. So he couldn't really give me an explanation. But I was happy to have my sight back. I took that as a sign from God that things were going to be all right.
As much as Liana remains optimistic, Tom can't shrug off a nagging suspicion that something is being overlooked.
I'm a scientist. I believe that for every effect or response the human body has, there's a cause. The question is somebody going to take the time to figure out the cause?
I could see the wheels turning, and I started thinking, he knows enough to question it, but is he right?
Despite Tom's uneasiness, he and Liana agree they have little choice but to proceed with the high-risk surgery.
It was very scary, but you know, if that's going to save my life, I have to go through it. I did not want to miss my grandchildren growing up, and the thought of me not being here for my kids and my grandkids was worse than having any horrible disease.
Liana Jones has just received some terrifying news. A doctor has identified a malignant tumor in her sinus cavity, directly under the brain. And high-risk surgery is the only chance of survival.
At first, I thought I was just going to lose it. But I just prayed and I said, God, okay, you're going to have to get me over this.
As they wheeled her out, I'd given her a kiss and said, I'll be here waiting for you when you come back. Seeing the love of your life going down the hallway to have somebody poke around in her head, it was pretty hair-raising. I was like a cat on a hot tin roof. I was really nervous that morning. The surgery lasted forever. My biggest fear was they would make a mistake.
After 5 grueling hours, the surgery is complete. But the operation didn't go quite like the medical team had planned.
They told me they were only able to take out 25% of the mass.
I wasn't real happy about those results. I was disappointed. I expected them to get more out than they did.
I looked at the surgeon and I'm like, why? And he explained to me that he did not want to make a cut that would probably kill me. You think about doing surgery up your nose, there's not that much space. So after I heard that, I thought, okay, I understand.
While the news is unnerving, the doctor assures Liana there is a chance that radiation might shrink the remaining portion of the tumor.
I just could not believe I'm going through all this horrible stuff to try to get rid of it, and they can't guarantee it's going to work. So we left that day, and I was beside myself.
We got her home. We had the radiation scheduled for the following week.
But halfway through the intense round of radiation, a bizarre incident makes the couple question everything they've been told.
I was at home, and I felt like something was in my nose. So I pushed the side of my nose closed and blew as hard as I felt was pretty safe. And I heard this thump. I looked into the handkerchief, and there was a piece of tissue there. It was green and yellow and tan and black. I was Needless to say, terrified.
She says, Tom, look at this. I'm looking at this thing going, oh my gracious, this isn't right. We told the doctor that she was blowing it out. They didn't want to see it. They really sloughed it off. There was no conversation. So my immediate reaction is, get it to the lab.
Frustrated beyond belief, Tom takes the tissue sample straight to his own lab. And surprisingly, when he examines it under a microscope, there is evidence of a biotoxin, chemicals from biological organisms that are toxic.
I started to freak out. I knew I needed a specialist. I'd heard about a doctor down on the Eastern Shore who dealt with biotoxins. And we set up an appointment with Dr. Shoemaker, and I said, Dr. Shoemaker, this is what I've got.
I was shocked. I have never had a patient do what Tom did.
Not only did I look at the slides, I also took photographs of everything that I saw to document it.
And I told Tom that we could send a sample of the material coming out of Liana's nose to a specialist.
After 4 long days, the lab report comes in. The news is nothing short of shocking.
She didn't have a cancer.
When I finally had a confirmation that this wasn't cancer, I was relieved. And I thought my husband was always right.
Based on the testing, her diagnosis was aspergillosis.
Aspergillosis is a rare disease caused by exposure to the toxic Aspergillus fungi. When a healthy individual inhales the Aspergillus fungi, the body's immune system fights off the toxins easily. But in patients like Liana, for some unknown reason, there's no immune response to keep the fungi from multiplying out of control. Over time, they form a fungus ball.
The fungus spore is breathed in, and it was localized deep in the sinuses, in a place where it could not be eradicated, and it started to grow. And as the ball started growing bigger and bigger, it reached a maximum size in that it couldn't grow anymore without compressing the inside of her brain.
We were dumbfounded when Dr. Shoemaker gave us his report. Our immediate reaction was, thank God it's not cancer, and my wife has more than 6 months to live.
Looking back, it's now clear that what Liana thought was sinus pressure was in fact the first sign of the fungal infection.
It is my opinion that the sole cause of the sinus pressure and the sinus pain was the size of the fungus ball. It was a mass effect.
As it grew larger, the fungus ball began to press on Liana's optic nerve.
The inflammation around the developing fungus ball brushing up against the optic nerve caused the blindness.
As a result, Liana mysteriously recovered her sight when the antibiotics she took prior to a biopsy started to destroy the massive growth.
Well, it turns out it was also an antifungal. It would have an effect on a growing fungus.
But the antibiotics only reduced the mass temporarily. Over time, it took on a life of its own, slowly destroying sections of Liana's skull.
It would have continued to grow and expand over time. Without treatment, aspergillosis can be fatal.
We had a lot more concern now because fungus can do some very dangerous things. This was going to be a battle.
I didn't think it was ever going to end. I didn't think it was ever going to stop. I didn't think there was anything that we could do to make it stop. And I was pleading with God, come on, you got to help me here. I can't take this anymore.
After undergoing dangerous brain surgery to remove what doctors thought was a cancerous mass, Liana Jones has just learned she never had a tumor, but a rare and deadly fungal infection.
Finding out that the mass was a fungal infection after going through surgery and radiation that I did not need, I was angry, but I knew I made a decision at the time that if this was cancer, I had to do everything I could to fight it.
And now the clock is ticking. Chemical toxins from the infection are eating away at the skull. Unless doctors can find a way to treat it, Liana will die. But first, it's imperative to identify where Liana came into contact with the fungus to keep her from being re-exposed.
We exposed her to fungi in every environment that we could think of, and her blood remained completely normal.
Then she went back to work. Immediately, within 24 hours after returning to the building, the blood tests that Dr. Shoemaker performs were abnormal.
And when her office building is tested for fungi, the aspergillus levels are off the charts.
I couldn't believe it that something like that could happen because no one else in the building was sick. I was susceptible for it and my body couldn't fight it.
Now that they have identified the root of the problem, Dr. Shoemaker is anxious to begin an aggressive treatment plan.
Liana was treated for the fungus ball with fungus-killing pills and fungus-killing nose sprays.
And after 15 minutes of taking it the first time, I felt really good. I felt an enormous difference.
By March of the following year, there was no sign of any mass in her sinus at all.
I couldn't believe it. The nightmare was over.
The family is overjoyed by Liana's progress, but they can't help but wonder why it took so long for her to get a solid diagnosis.
Aspergillosis is very rare in the sinuses. It is a 1 in a million diagnosis.
I have found through my literature searches 12 cases exactly like Liana's. Just 12. And that's throughout the world over the last 20 years.
Today, Liana is pain-free and enjoying every minute of her life.
Now spending time with my family is extremely important to me because you're not guaranteed tomorrow.
I got my wife back. She's doing great. You know, I love her to death. She's the best thing that ever happened to me.
I thank him so much for not giving up. But I love him very, very much. He's been my life and will continue to be.
What I've learned from this experience is don't take anybody's word for it. I think the good Lord has given all of us certain talents and abilities, and I just happen to be at the right place at the right time to take care of the most precious thing in my life.
Next, Robin Akbar, a devoted single mother, is forced to confront her own mortality when a series of debilitating symptoms take over her life. In the fall of 1996, 19-year-old Robin Akbar was living with her boyfriend in Lafayette, Louisiana. Young and in love, they were eagerly looking forward to the birth of their first child.
David was born on September 20th, 1996, and it was the most indescribable experience. It was good to watch him grow and just develop as a baby.
But with no family nearby to help out, the strain of so much responsibility weighs heavily on the young couple.
We did eventually part ways, still keeping David in our full focus. I wanted nothing more than the best for David. His father was in the picture somewhat, but not enough to know David inside and out the way I did.
My mom and I, we were like best friends. She did the best job that she could because my dad wasn't around.
I had a job at a medical staffing agency where I was working full-time plus some, probably at that point 60 to 70 hours a week, so that he could go to the better schools and could have the better things.
But despite her very busy schedule, Robin manages to stay fit.
I really prided myself in being size 2. I love to run. I ran between 15 to 17 miles a week.
Robin feels extraordinarily lucky to have such a solid handle on her life. Little does she know, everything is about to change forever, one morning in April of 2005.
I was on one of my runs, and then I lost my breath for a second. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch my breath. I almost felt like I was drowning. I knew that something was awfully wrong.
Robin Akbar, a 28-year-old single mother, has always been physically fit, running up to 17 miles a week. But now, during a seemingly ordinary run, she's struck by a frightening feeling she has never had before.
All of a sudden, I couldn't catch my breath. I couldn't get in enough oxygen. So I rushed to the doctor's office. The doctor did a thorough exam, and it was his idea that I had adult onset asthma. The doctor prescribed me a steroid inhaler.
The physician assures Robin that it won't take long for her asthma symptoms to subside. But over the next 3 months, they just get worse.
She was always coughing, always grabbing her chest and not being able to breathe.
And I just thought I could use the medication and it would go away, but it didn't happen. I felt like I was suffocating almost in my own body, and that was terrifying.
Exercise is out of the question, and even daily activities have become difficult.
Not being able to be physically active was very frustrating, but I had no choice.
And the asthma is affecting Robin's life in another troubling way. The side effects from the steroid inhaler are transforming her body.
I started to notice weight gain almost immediately. I went from a size 2 to a size 18 from the steroid usage, and there was nothing I could do about it. I was very depressed at that point.
Robin does the best she can to adapt to the restrictions in her life. But one morning, she's taken aback by a painful new sensation.
I just had the sinus pressure, a headache. I had had sinus infections in the past, but nothing like this.
For almost 2 weeks, Robin tries countless over-the-counter remedies, but nothing helps. Desperate for relief, she makes an appointment with an ear, nose, and throat specialist.
When I first went to Dr. Foreman, I was hoping that he would find something.
When she initially came in, her sinuses were exceptionally inflamed, so we knew that she had a serious problem.
He told me I was just full of nasal polyps in every sinus cavity.
Nasal polyps are non-cancerous growths in the nose or sinuses. They can block the area and create difficulty breathing.
He recommended endoscopic sinus surgery, which he felt would improve my breathing.
The polyps were all removed. We felt that, surgically speaking, we had performed a good operation.
After the surgery was over, I felt like my airways and my sinuses were open. It was great.
For the first time in 6 months, Robin feels confident that things are looking up. But just a few days later, an all too familiar sensation sets in.
I felt like I could not make my lungs expand. What good is it being able to breathe through your nose if you can't make your lungs work?
By the spring, 2 years after the asthma first appeared, Robin is at an all-time low. She feels winded just standing up, and her whole body aches.
I was doing the best that I could, but some days I couldn't make it to work, and I did have to call in sick.
But then it was a sick day after another sick day.
People in the office were noticing my being late for work, my continual missing work, and I was afraid they would let me go.
Just when Robin thinks it can't get any worse, a terrifying new symptom surfaces.
I was coughing and coughing, and my chest hurt. And with one of the coughs, there was blood in my hand. I was very scared, and I really didn't know what to do. My body was deteriorating, and I knew if I did not find what was going on with me, I was going to die.
Over the last 2 years, Robin Akbar has endured asthma so debilitating that surgery and medication have barely made a difference. Now, a disturbing new symptom has left her coughing up blood, and she's forced to drive herself to the closest ER.
I got very, very scared. I thought, okay, something is going on. in my lungs. I knew that I needed help.
Over the next 3 days, Robin undergoes a battery of tests, but they reveal nothing out of the ordinary.
The doctor said, well, sometimes, those things can come along with asthma. And I said, okay, well, if it's just asthma, why do I have the fatigue? Why do I have the body aches? The doctor had no answers. I felt like I had nowhere to turn to.
Robin is once again sent home with even more powerful steroids, and they help for a few weeks. But then her condition begins to spiral out of control.
As my mom became more unable to do things around the house, I had to step up. I swept the bathrooms, I did the laundry, I cooked dinner.
I was 30 years old, and my body felt like that of a 90-year-old woman.
It got to the point where she would ask me to put her toothpaste on her toothbrush and leave it by the sink for her.
I did at that point feel some sense of guilt because I felt like I was robbing his childhood, but I needed his help at that point. I had no choice.
Then, one gray December morning, after suffering for 2.5 years, Robin finds herself facing her worst nightmare.
It got back to my supervisor that I couldn't perform my duties. They asked me not to come back to work. I was devastated.
It was a big shock to me because I was thinking to myself, how are we going to live? How are we going to have TV and the lights? And it just dawned on me that we weren't going to be able to.
I was very concerned because I had this illness. I could not go and look for another job. So then was the question, how am I going to provide for my son? I remember thinking, this is probably going to be my last Christmas with my son, so I better make the best of it.
Unemployed and with no savings, Robin can't pay her rent or put food on the table.
I did have to make the choice to let him live with his father. It was very, very heartbreaking. I had conveyed to David that, again, this is just temporary and, we were going to get back together.
It was a very sad day. I just had to look up. Had to look up to the future.
The next 3 months are agonizing for Robin as she's evicted from her home and is forced to sell everything she owns.
And one day, people just came in and took out all the things that I had worked for so many years to accumulate. And it was gone. And I had nothing but a few clothes and a couple of keepsake pictures that I kept.
Penniless and with no family to turn to, Robin's choices are bleak. And in desperation, she moves into a homeless shelter.
I looked around and I thought, I'm educated and now I'm in a shelter. And, what am I doing here?
2 months later, at the end of her rope, Robin reaches out to an old friend for guidance, Dolores Guidry.
Robin and I met for the first time about 7 years ago at a local church where we both attended. The Robin that I saw on my couch was a shell of the person that I knew before.
And I just told her, I'm not doing well and I'm pretty scared.
My heart just went out to Robin. She had lost everything.
Dolores did, at that point, tell me that I could live with her.
Horrified at Robin's decline, Dolores begins searching for a doctor who can help her friend.
We found another specialist. We went to the doctor and he was shocked at her deterioration.
When I got there, the doctor ordered a barrage of blood work and he ordered a CAT scan of my chest.
The doctor told us that he found nodules on Robin's lungs. The doctor said that it could be cancer.
I think at that point, I was kind of numb. It was just kind of a knot in my throat.
Robin and I had been preparing for bad news, but when we heard the word cancer, it was devastating. Robin felt like that was it, that she would have to say goodbye to her son, David.
And I just sat there, choking back the tears. Now I had to tell my son that I was possibly gonna die.
Over the past 4 years, 32-year-old single mother Robin Akbar has been suffering from what doctors believe is asthma. It's so severe that she can't work and is forced to send her 12-year-old son David to live with his father. Now she's received some shocking news. A scan has revealed nodules on her lungs that could be cancer.
I was thinking at that point, how am I going to tell David? What am I going to tell him? What's going to happen to me?
I got really scared that she had cancer because you hear all these stories about people dying from cancer, and it was hard to wrap my mind around what the death of my mother would do to me.
He said, Mom, I don't know. If anything happens to you, I'm just going to go crazy. And I told him, no, you're not. You're going to make it. To myself, I said, okay, I'm going to have to fight it for my son's sake. I have the disease, but it's not going to stop me until I take my last breath. I decided to, once again, go back to Dr. Foreman, the same one who had done my sinus surgery.
And we felt it necessary then to get a more firm diagnosis on what was going on in the lungs. We arranged to have her admitted into a pulmonary facility, which did a battery of tests. It was not a cancer. Based on her recent test results, we were able to give Robin the diagnosis of Churg-Strauss syndrome.
Churg-Strauss syndrome, or CSS, is an inflammatory disease that can affect any organ in the body. In healthy individuals, eosinophils, a type of white blood cell, help regulate the body's immune response to allergens. But in patients like Robin, for some unknown reason, the eosinophils proliferate very rapidly, forming clusters in the airway and lungs.
All of these different accumulations of the eosinophils that were then blocking her airways caused her to have a worsening of her breathing potential.
I remember thinking, yes, finally, there is a valid reason for everything that's been taking place in my body.
Dr. Foreman explains that CSS is triggered by common allergic reactions, which appeared in Robin as asthma and sinus problems.
Eosinophils are commonly seen in nasal polyps in people who have allergies. In her particular case, they were probably related to the progression of her disease.
As Robin's asthma and sinus issues got worse, the eosinophils multiplied like wildfire. They began forming small clusters that attacked her organs, starting with the lungs.
Dr. Foreman said the eosinophil begins to multiply rampantly and basically take over and accumulate in different organs of the body in the form of nodules, which was the reason for the nodules in the lungs. And I asked him, okay, is it terminal? Just tell me.
Had Robin's disorder not been diagnosed, her symptoms would have continued. And she also would have seen an inflammation actually of the blood vessels themselves. So essentially, the kidneys could be damaged, the brain could be damaged, the heart could be damaged. Death can then ensue.
Unfortunately, there is no cure for CSS. Luckily for Robin, in some cases, chemotherapy can slow the progression of the disease and send it into remission.
The ultimate treatment goal for Churg-Strauss is to reduce the eosinophil count and reduce inflammation.
As the weeks went by on the treatment, I started to feel better.
Robin's life changed dramatically. She had a hope that was not there before.
I was very excited that things were going to slowly return to normal.
I could just do things that we so often as humans take for granted, the little things,
While she's relieved to be in remission, Robin can't help but wonder why no other doctor was able to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Churg-Strauss is a difficult disorder to diagnose in its early phases, mainly because the two presenting symptoms of asthma and sinusitis are so prevalent in the general population. Churg-Strauss is a rare syndrome. It is seen in some studies to range from 2.4 to 10 per 1 million people.
With a diagnosis in hand, Robin qualifies for disability.
I was able to slowly start to rebuild my life. I was able to get an apartment and have David come back and live with me again. I got my son back, which was probably the best gift through it all.
Today, almost a year and a half later, Robin is thriving.
I have breath, and I get one more day to see my son go to school. One more day I get to fight with him because he's running late in the morning. Those are all precious, precious commodities.
I am very proud of my mom because she's been through all this and she hasn't said, I quit. She stuck with it.
I am grateful to my friend Dolores, and I would like to say thank you. To those who are still looking for diagnosis and who have been brushed off and continue to be brushed off and ignored, I would say, don't quit. Don't stop. Even if it means it's to the last breath, refuse to quit.